the splitting of the atom only a few decades ago, and through his God-given genius of science, man, at last, has succeeded in penetrating further and further into the unknown vastness of space.
What if I told you there's a movie where astronauts crash onto a hidden planet full of tiny green people? And that's not even the weirdest part. Released in 1961, The Phantom Planet begins as a simple space mission before exploding into shrinking humans, alien courtrooms, space pirates, and completely chaotic sci-fi logic. It never became a major classic, but its bizarre story and unforgettable weirdness earned it a cult following over time. With bargain bin special effects, strange costumes, and actors delivering serious performances in absurd situations, the movie feels wonderfully unhinged. Today, we're diving into 20 weird facts about the unforgettable sci-fi oddity, The Phantom Planet. Number 1. The movie lives in 1980. Let's start with the audacity, shall we? The Phantom Planet was made in 1961. But the filmmakers, bless their ambitious little hearts, decided to set it in the near future. And by near future, they meant 1980. The entire film is framed as a documentary-style report narrated from 1980, as if it's breaking news from 19 years in the future. A future which, spoiler alert, had absolutely none of the space adventures depicted in this film. No microplanets, no shrinking astronauts, just disco and a hostage crisis. But in 1961, 19 years felt practically tomorrow, and these filmmakers were convinced humanity would be zipping through deep space by then. Adorable. Genuinely, jaw-droppingly adorable. What makes this even better is the tone. They weren't going for campy. They were going for credibility. This film wanted you to sit down, take notes, and think, yes, this is probably how 1980 is going to go. The confidence, the sheer unearned confidence of it all. But if you think setting a drive-in quickie in the credible future is bold, wait until you hear about the budget they were working with to pull that off. Number 2. It was a shoestring indie B-movie. Oh, we need to talk about the money. Or rather, the spectacular lack of it. The Phantom Planet was not a studio picture. It was not a prestige project. It was an independently produced B-movie, made for what we can only imagine was the contents of someone's couch cushions, aimed squarely at drive-in theaters and late-night TV double features. There is a specific art form to the low-budget sci-fi quickie of the late 50s and early 60s, and The Phantom Planet is a masterclass in it. You need stock footage? Use it. You need a spaceship? Find a model in a hobby shop. You need a space sound effect? We'll get to that particular corner-cutting maneuver later, and it is genuinely iconic. The film was never designed for first-run theaters. It was made to be sandwiched between two other movies at a drive-in while teenagers fogged up the windows of their Chevrolets. And honestly, for that purpose, it delivered. It had aliens, it had a hero, it had a girl. Box checked, check, and check. But here's the thing that separates the genuinely interesting bad movies from the forgettable ones. Even when you're working with nothing, the weird little choices you make still end up mattering. And this film made some choices. Speaking of choices, they needed a leading man, someone square-jawed, heroic, wooden enough to anchor all this glorious nonsense. And they found exactly the right kind of wrong person for the job. Number 3. The lead was TV's Steve Canyon. The man tasked with carrying the Phantom Planet on his perfectly pressed spacesuit shoulders was one Dean Fredericks. In the world of early American TV, Dean Fredericks was somebody. He was the title character in the TV series Steve Canyon, based on the popular comic strip, playing a dashing Air Force pilot with all the emotional complexity of a department store mannequin. He brought every single bit of that energy into the Phantom Planet. Astronaut Frank Chapman is stiff, square-jawed, and impeccably heroic in a way that somehow makes him less interesting to watch the more he speaks. He has the kind of leading man face that belongs on a wartime recruitment poster, and the kind of line delivery that makes you appreciate good acting a lot more afterward. But here's the gossip. That rigidity, that very particular brand of 1950s all-American hero energy, it actually works for this movie. You don't want a complex, nuanced protagonist in the Phantom Planet. You want someone who can say the words "degrees ecliptic" with a straight face and make you almost believe he knows what that means. And Dean Fredericks? He delivers. And speaking of degrees ecliptic, did this film actually know what it was talking about? Surprisingly, kind of. Number 4. It casually drops real astronomy jargon. Here's where the Phantom Planet surprises you. In the middle of all the shrinking men and miniature aliens and absolutely made-up science, the dialogue casually starts throwing around terms like degrees ecliptic and degrees azimuth. And those? Those are real. Ecliptic latitude is an actual measurement in celestial navigation. It's how astronomers describe positions relative to the plane of the Earth's orbit around the Sun. Azimuth is a genuine directional bearing used in both astronomy and navigation. These aren't made-up sci-fi words. Somebody on this production actually cracked open a reference book. Does the film use these terms with perfect accuracy? Absolutely not. Don't be silly. But the fact that they're in there at all gives the whole thing this peculiar veneer of legitimacy, like the movie is winking at you. We did some homework. Not a lot, but some. It makes you realize there was at least one person in the writer's room who cared about getting a little bit of it right, even while the rest of the script was inventing science wholesale. But while someone was fact-checking the astronomy, someone else was cutting corners on the sound design, and they did it in the most oddly specific way imaginable. Number 5. That eerie drone sound. Picture this. You're watching the Phantom Planet. The planet, looms into view. Underneath the scene, there's this eerie, unsettling hum, a strange ambient drone that makes the whole micro-world feel genuinely otherworldly. It's atmospheric. It works. You're kind of impressed. And then you find out where they got it. That hum, the signature sound of the entire planet, was lifted straight out of a music library. Specifically, it's from a cue called Caliban and Ariel by composer Desmond Leslie, part of a vintage sci-fi themed collection made exactly for productions that couldn't afford original scores. They just found it on a shelf. Is this scandalous? In the world of low-budget filmmaking, not really. But there's something delightfully brazen about the fact that the defining sonic identity of your alien planet came from a stock catalog. The whole atmosphere of this micro-world, this sense of alienness and wonder, off the shelf. And it worked. And the film moved on. That's a level of resourcefulness that modern filmmakers with million-dollar budgets should study. But the most shocking piece of trivia in this little B-movie isn't the library music. It's the face you're about to recognize in the most unexpected place. Number 6. This was Richard Kiel's feature film debut. Stop what you're doing. We need to have a moment here. Among the lumbering giant alien invaders in the Phantom Planet, uncredited, barely visible, mostly in the background, is a 7'2" gentle giant who would go on to become one of the most iconic figures in cinematic history. That is Richard Kiel from The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. The man with the steel teeth. The man who would make James Bond sweat. And this Nobody's Going to Remember This B-movie was his feature film debut. He was uncredited. He was playing a nameless alien invader. He was probably thrilled just to be in front of a camera. And the movie had absolutely no idea it had hired a future legend. That's the thing about these little quickies from the early 60s. They were accidentally excellent at discovering talent before the rest of the world caught up. Richard Kiel went into that production as a very tall young man with a dream, and he came out having appeared in a feature film. The fact that we only found out he was in it through the lens of retrospect makes it all the more delicious. Keep your eyes on those alien invaders, people. That's Hollywood history, hiding in plain sight. No, Kiel wasn't the only unforgettable thing in this movie. There's a scene, the scene, that nobody who has ever seen this film can get out of their heads. And it involves an astronaut, a space suit, and a very compromising situation. Number 7. The Shrink in the Suit Shocker. This is the scene. The one the Phantom Planet is really known for among the cult faithful. And once you hear it described, you will absolutely understand why. Astronaut Chapman lands on the asteroid planet. Standard B-movie fare. But then the scientific effect of the planet's atmosphere kicks in, and Chapman starts to shrink. He shrinks inside his spacesuit. He gets smaller and smaller until his full-sized regulation space helmet is just sitting there. And inside it, tiny, is Chapman, now apparently naked because his suit didn't shrink with him. The image that results, a full-sized helmet with a miniature man visible inside it, is genuinely striking. It's oddly well executed for a film working with almost no resources, and it has stuck in the memory of everyone who has encountered this movie like a splinter. The kind of visual that shouldn't work, but absolutely does, because it's so committed to its own absurdity. This scene is the reason people remember the Phantom Planet. Not the astronomy jargon, not Richard Kiel, the naked shrunken man in the helmet. The movie absolutely earned that reputation. But how do you explain the shrinking? Oh, don't worry, the movie tried. The explanation just made absolutely zero sense. Number 8. The science makes zero sense. So Chapman is now tiny. Problem established. Solution? Breathe oxygen. That's it. That's the science. Breathe oxygen and you'll grow back to your normal size. The film does attempt to wrap this in pseudo-scientific vocabulary. Words spoken, techno-babble deployed, serious faces made. But what it boils down to is oxygen equals unshrinking. And the film just expects you to nod along. If oxygen restores your size, why doesn't Chapman just carry a tank around and stay normal-sized the whole time? How does the oxygen molecule know it's supposed to unshrink you and not just, let you breathe? These questions are not addressed. These questions are not welcome. The script works on the principle that if you say something confidently enough, with enough scientific-sounding words nearby, an audience at a drive-in in 1961 will give you a pass. And you know what? They were probably right. But if the oxygen shrinking logic has problems, just wait until you hear about the fundamental scale issue at the heart of this story. Because everyone in this film is the wrong size, and the movie barely seems to notice. Number 9. Everyone but Chapman is tiny. Chapman shrinks down and finds himself among the native Retin people, a civilization living on this micro-asteroid planet. They are tiny, Lilliputian, a miniature race of humanoids who have built an entire civilization at a fraction of the scale of a regular human being. Chapman, now shrunk to their size, moves among them as more or less an equal. There are Retin women he finds attractive. Reton warriors he fights. A whole Reton political structure he gets entangled in. It's a fairly standard Lost Race story, just small. The film never grapples with the implications of this scale. These people built spaceships, tiny spaceships. They have weapons, tiny weapons, an entire functioning society. But at no point does the film ask how a civilization this small developed the technology to do any of the things they apparently do. The Reton world exists to give us the shrinking scene and the visual interest of a different scale. And once the film has used those elements, it politely ignores them. But here's where the scale logic gets really twisted. Because the people invading the Reton world are supposed to be giant. Key word, supposed to be. Number 10. The giant invaders are also tiny. The Solarites, the villains, the terrifying alien invaders who threaten the Reton civilization. Giants who tower over the tiny Reton people. That is the concept. That is what the movie tells you. Here is what the movie shows you. The Solarites are also miniaturized because they need to fit on the same screen and in the same sets as the Reton characters. The enormous giants and the tiny natives are, functionally, the same size on screen, because making one group actually giant would have been expensive, and this was not that kind of production. What this accidentally does is kind of philosophically interesting. If the Reton are small relative to normal humans, and the Solarites are giant relative to the Reton, then by implication, regular humans are even bigger still, which makes humanity the implied giants of this entire cosmic pecking order. The film did not intend this reading. The film was just trying to keep its sets manageable. But the accidental implication that we are the ultimate giants of the universe is genuinely kind of funny. You might think, okay, Chapman gets back to full size eventually, right? And when he does, surely we get the classic moment, the giant man chaos, the stomping. Well, number 11, no giant man climax. The Phantom Planet sets up the perfect conditions for a giant man rampage, and then completely refuses to deliver one. In every other movie that has ever touched this premise, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Village of the Giants, The Amazing Colossal Man, the grow-back moment is the payoff. That's when the big guy looms over everything, stomps around, creates chaos. That's the deal. The Phantom Planet does not do this. Chapman grows back. He is now a giant relative to the Reton. And then, the movie just moves on. There is no rampage, no stomping, no moment of awe as the tiny people stare up at their now towering visitor. It is the most anticlimactic use of a shrinking and growing premise in the history of cinema. Whether this was a budget decision, a creative decision, or an oversight, we will never truly know. But the absence of the expected payoff is so glaring that it almost feels like a deliberate provocation. Almost. And it's not just the giant climax this film borrows from and fumbles. The whole DNA of the story has some very recognizable ancestors. Number 12. A knockoff of Flash Gordon. Let's be honest about what the Phantom Planet actually is at its core. It is a Flash Gordon knockoff wearing a lab coat and trying to look serious. The bones of the story. The square-jawed American hero, transported to an alien world, navigating a strange civilization, getting tangled up with its women and its politics, ultimately helping them defeat a menacing outside force that is essentially the plot of every Flash Gordon serial ever made, plus a sprinkling of Buck Rogers. The film even has that serial-era pacing, that sense that you're watching episodes strung together rather than a single cohesive narrative. The difference is that the Phantom Planet desperately wants to be taken seriously. The Flash Gordon serials leaned into their pulpy camp. They were fun about being absurd. The Phantom Planet puts on a documentary voiceover and uses real astronomy terms because it has aspirations. It is a B-movie with A-movie pretensions and C-movie resources. The result satisfies neither audience completely and is therefore absolutely fascinating to watch. Of course, no self-respecting space adventure is complete without a love triangle. And the Phantom Planet has one, sort of. It's actually very simple. And that's the problem. Number 13. The love triangle is barely a triangle. Every space opera needs a romantic subplot. It's practically a legal requirement. And so, the Phantom Planet dutifully provides one. Except that calling it a love triangle is being extremely generous. It is more of a love suggestion. A love vibe, perhaps. Chapman arrives on the microplanet and is pulled into the orbit of two women. First, there's Zetha, played by Dolores Faith, the mute daughter of one of the Rayton elders, who communicates entirely through expressive glances and meaningful silences. She is our romantic lead, delicate, mysterious, and the movie very much wants you to root for her and Chapman. Then there's the other woman, assertive, vocal, and immediately less interesting to the film's gaze, which tells you everything you need to know about 1961. The triangle proceeds exactly as you'd expect. The sweet, passive love interest versus the challenging, assertive one, with the minimum drama possible. It's not developed enough to create tension, not abandoned fast enough to save time. It just sits there, occupying screen time, being a subplot. Speaking of things that don't quite deliver, let's talk about the final showdown with the terrifying Solarites. Surely the film pulled out all the stops for that, right? Number 14. The main villain is never really defeated. The Solarites are the villains, menacing, alien, theoretically enormous. And when the climax of the Phantom Planet arrives, the film dispatches them with something called anti-gravity disintegration plates. We should sit with that for a moment. Anti-gravity disintegration plates. Is this a cool concept? On paper, sort of. In execution? It is one of the most anticlimactic villain defeats in B-movie history. The Solarites are neutralized. The battle, if you can call it that, is over. And you're sitting there thinking, that's it? There's no dramatic confrontation, no satisfying moment of the hero outwitting the villain. There are anti-gravity disintegration plates, and then there are no more Solarites, and the film moves on. The film spends so much of its running time building up this external threat, then resolves it so quickly and quietly that you almost wonder if they simply ran out of money, or time, or both. The answer is probably both. But at least Chapman gets home, right? At least there's a proper ending? Oh, honey. Number 15. Was it all a dream? Chapman makes it back. He's rescued. The mission is complete. And here's where the Phantom Planet does something that is either deeply cynical or genuinely avant-garde, depending on how charitable you're feeling. The recovery team suggests that everything Chapman experienced might have been a hallucination. That's right. The film spends its entire runtime building a world, establishing a civilization, introducing characters, setting up drama, and then, in the final stretch, casually entertains the idea that none of it happened. That Chapman was just floating in space, oxygen-deprived and dreaming. It's the oldest trick in the "we don't have a satisfying conclusion" playbook. It undercuts the stakes of everything that came before. It asks you to consider that all the weird, wonderful nonsense you just watched might be meaningless. For a film that took itself so seriously, that used documentary narration and real astronomy terms, this is a profound act of self-sabotage. Unless, of course, you read it as the film being cleverer than it appears, which is generous, very generous. But the film can't quite commit to the "it was all a dream" ending either, because it has a very specific piece of evidence that suggests otherwise. Number 16. A tiny rock proves it happened. In an act of narrative cowardice so complete, it loops all the way around into being fascinating. The Phantom Planet refuses to commit to either explanation. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it wasn't. Who can say? Well, the movie can say, because Chapman has brought back a tiny rock, a microscopic fragment from the Retin world, physical, tangible evidence that the microplanet exists. It's sitting there, right there, undeniable. This tiny rock is the film's way of having it both ways. It raises the hallucination possibility, giving the story a veneer of ambiguity, while simultaneously planting concrete evidence that says, no, it was real. The planet exists. The Retin exist. This tiny rock proves it. You get the worst of both approaches. The ambiguity isn't satisfying because the rock is right there. And the rock isn't satisfying because the movie already made you doubt everything. Masterful incompetence. Genuinely hard to pull off. And yet, here we are. And the man responsible for all of this glorious chaos? He had an interesting path to the director's chair himself. Number 17. Director William Marshall. William Marshall directed The Phantom Planet. And before he was behind the camera, he was in front of it. Marshall was an actor first, and this film sits among his early directorial credits in low-budget science fiction. There's a specific quality to the Phantom Planet's performances, a kind of overcoached earnestness, a sense of people being directed to commit fully to material that deserved a bit more winking skepticism. That makes more sense when you know the director came from acting. Former actors who direct often prioritize performance over technical craft. And Marshall clearly wanted his cast to believe in this story even when the story wasn't making it easy for them. The flip side is that actor-directors sometimes struggle with big-picture structural decisions, pacing, plot economy, knowing when to cut a scene, and some of the Phantom Planet's more meandering qualities feel like the work of someone still developing their directorial eye. But there's genuine warmth in this film, an enthusiasm for the material that reflects someone who cared about what they were making. In the ecosystem of early 60s B-movies, William Marshall made something people are still talking about. That's not nothing. Number 18. And so the story begins. After the shrinking, the microplanet, the fake love triangle, the anticlimactic villain defeat, the maybe it was a dream hedging, and the tiny rock, the movie closes with what may be the most overused ending device in the history of science fiction. And so the story begins. Not ends. Begins. This is the classic serial ending, the one that says, "We have merely set the stage, intrepid viewer." The real adventure? That's still to come. It positions everything you just watched as prologue, as the first chapter of humanity's great space saga, which is absolutely, definitely going to continue in future installments. Dear viewer, there were no future installments. The sequel-baiting ending of The Phantom Planet remains one of cinema's great unfulfilled promises. There is no Chapter 2. There is no "and so the story continues." There is only this film, this ending, and the magnificent ghost of a franchise that never was. It's the perfect final note for a movie that aimed for the stars and landed somewhere considerably more interesting. The drive-in parking lot, surrounded by teenagers who didn't care and absolutely should have. And that tension between goofy subject matter and desperate sincerity runs through the entire film, from the very first frame to the very last. Number 19. Serious narration versus goofy plot. Let's talk about the tonal identity crisis at the heart of The Phantom Planet, because it is spectacular. On one side, you have the serious face of the film, the documentary-style voiceover, the real astronomy terminology, the straight-faced performances, the pseudo-scientific explanations, the complete refusal to acknowledge that any of this is silly. This is the movie that wants to be taken seriously, that believes it is contributing something meaningful to the science fiction conversation of the early 1960s. On the other side, you have what the movie is actually about: a man who shrinks inside his own spacesuit, bug-eyed monster invaders, a mute love interest, oxygen that fixes everything, a tiny souvenir rock, a villain defeated by anti-gravity disintegration plates. These two sides are in constant, glorious tension. Every time the documentary narration tries to ground you in plausibility, the plot yanks you back into lunacy. Every time the plot threatens to get genuinely engaging, the pacing slumps into serial-style meander. The result is a film that exists in a unique cinematic no man's land. Too earnest to be campy fun. Too weird to be credible science fiction. And in that no man's land, it found its true identity. A perfect artifact of its moment, preserved in amber. Which brings us to the final, most important weird fact of all. Number 20. A cult oddity today. Here is where the story of The Phantom Planet gets its best twist. Because this film, this low-budget drive-in quickie, ignored by critics, barely noticed by audiences, produced for pocket change, has found a second life. The Phantom Planet is a cult classic now. Not in a grand, celebrated way, not in the way that Forbidden Planet or The Day the Earth Stood Still are classics, but in the specific, loving, whispered way that true cult films are cherished. It shows up in weird sci-fi compilations. It has YouTube deep dives dedicated to it. People find it, watch it, can't quite explain why they're charmed by it, and then tell their friends. Because here is the truth about The Phantom Planet, and maybe the truth about all the best bad movies. It has personality. It has specific weird choices nobody else would have made. Richard Kiel's uncredited debut, The Shrinking Man in the Helmet, The Tiny Rock, and the "and so the story begins" ending that led nowhere. It is, against all odds, memorable. And in a world absolutely drowning in content that disappears the moment you close the tab, a movie made in 1961 for approximately nothing that you still can't quite get out of your head 60 years later? That's actually kind of extraordinary. That's The Phantom Planet. Weird, cheap, earnest, unforgettable. And there you have it. 20 weird, wonderful, utterly unhinged facts about The Phantom Planet, the little B-movie that could. From Richard Kiel's Hollywood origin story to the oxygen that unshrinks you. From the anti-gravity disintegration plates to the tiny rock that proves everything and nothing. This film is a time capsule, a curiosity, and a genuinely good time if you know how to watch it. If you're new here, welcome. This is what we do. We dig into the weird corners of classic science fiction, find the stories nobody is telling, and give these forgotten films the deep dive they deserve. Hit that like button if you made it this far. Drop a comment with your favorite weird B movie. I want to know what's hiding in your watch list. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And until then, stay curious, stay weird, and never trust a movie that ends with, "and so the story begins."